My name is Bert, and this is the Still Life Podcast. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me on episode 7 of the Still Life Podcast. Today, I'm going to reminisce a bit. In doing some cleaning the other day, I came across an old stack of pictures from my deployment in 2002-2003. Here I was, a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 20-year-old, 4 months out of the Army's communications school. I had the whole world in front of me and was eager to take on everything that came my way. We hit the ground in late December of 2002, flying into the country of Qatar. At that time, we really didn't know what to expect, so we were loaded up with our flak jackets and Kevlar helmets and rifles at the ready, despite not having received our ammunition yet. We wanted to at least look like we were prepared. Fortunately, though, I was part of a medical battalion, so if anything did happen, I was definitely in the right and capable hands. We spent the first couple of weeks in Qatar at the Army Central Command headquarters, setting up a field hospital and getting acclimated to the climate in the Middle East. From there, we left a small contingent behind, and the vast majority of us moved on to Kuwait. Once we kind of got our feet under us at Camp Doha in Kuwait, the vast majority of the unit went in to work at the hospital at Camp Doha. Being communications, none of my gear had arrived in theater yet, and so I was kind of left in limbo with really not much to do. So really, I spent my time in and out of the hospital, helping out where I could and just learning and observing and getting to know the camp and all the things that were kind of around the general area. And since I had some free time, I was able to get my military, or I guess Qatari driver's license, so that I was able to drive outside of the camp in Kuwait City. And it was during that time that I also became mail handler certified and helped deliver mail throughout the camp. And it was about 2 weeks after that I was tasked with being the aide, driver, and bodyguard to the CFLIC surgeon, Brigadier General George Waitman. Now, this was right around the beginning of February of 2003. This was probably a couple of weeks before we officially declared war in Iraq. And it was sometime in February or March, if I remember correctly, that a couple of civilian contractors were ambushed just outside of Camp Doha. They were mowed down by a barrage of AK-47 fire. After the Kuwaitis were done with them, they brought the bodies into our hospital, and this is something that I'm both glad I did and something that I regret doing, but I was able to go back and view the bodies and see exactly what happened. And again, fortunately and unfortunately, those are images that I will never forget. Seeing what a small projectile, or a lot of small projectiles really, can do to a human body. It's pretty unbelievable. And it was definitely a sobering moment because you had the realization that combat is very real. Not being on the front lines, you're kind of shielded and I guess protected from actual combat. And to have something happen that close and then to see the aftermath of that really is a reality check that, what's happening is very real. And even though things seem relatively safe, anything can happen, and we are most certainly at risk and in danger ourselves. And the more I began to drive off post, the more concerned I was, of course, for my safety and the safety of the general that I was protecting. And despite the fact that when we traveled, I typically was never in uniform, it's still kind of hard to blend in being a white guy in a Middle Eastern country, kind of stand out. So in a sense, I was constantly a little paranoid, watching and looking at every driver and trying to assess risks on the road. And then, under every overpass. I would look, in the corners, look on the overpass itself to see if there were any threats. And I had developed quite the lead foot, typically driving between 80 and 100 miles an hour everywhere I went. Now, in developing some of these skills, they weren't all bad. Having my head on a swivel and being very aware of everything that was going on when I was on the road and being, very observant of the world around me made me a much better driver when I returned. However, on the flip side of that, developing a lead foot did not serve me well upon returning. I amassed several speeding tickets in a rather short period of time because I was just so accustomed to driving fast everywhere I went. The less amount of time I was on the road, the safer we were. So it was always get there as quickly and efficiently as you can without putting us at risk because you're driving so fast. So it was a balancing act. And again, having to deprogram that out of my system and out of my brain took several years. But I will say that now, even, 18, 19 years removed from my deployment, there are still some of the learned behaviors or traits or skills that I developed over there that stick with me even to this day. Some good, some not so good. I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't still have some mild paranoia when I'm on the highway, constantly keeping my head on a swivel and evaluating the road and the cars around me for potential threats. It's just not one of those things that you walk away from and you just kind of forget everything. I mean, it really becomes muscle memory and it sticks with you, like I said, good or bad. And fortunately and unfortunately, my tenure as the aide driver and bodyguard to General Waitman only lasted about 6 to 8 weeks. It was towards the end of that time that I actually got pulled from duty and was made the communications sergeant for the 3rd Area Support Medical Battalion, which would be the first medical unit to be organized and stood up in a combat zone during wartime. So pretty cool little historical tidbit, and it's something I am very proud of. And I will dig more into my experiences with that on another episode. But I will end this episode with this. Regardless of the bad and terrible things that I witnessed in my time on my deployment, I also saw a lot of really good things. And overall, I learned a lot. Something that I told myself going into this deployment was that I was going to keep an open mind and this was to be a learning experience. I've always had that childlike curiosity about life and every scenario and situation that I find myself in, and I really make an effort to learn as much as possible and immerse myself into these things as much as I can. So I can say that overwhelmingly I had a very positive experience because of my mindset from the inception of the deployment. So, I will go on in other episodes to talk about some of the great things and some of the not so great things that I experienced in my time in the Middle East. But, like I said, I'll get into that in other episodes down the road. So thank you so much for joining me today on the Still Life podcast. I do appreciate your listenership and support. And as always, remember, if you have questions, comments, topic ideas, or suggestions, or you'd like to sponsor the Still Life podcast, you can always email us, thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. That's thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining me today on the Still Life podcast, and we'll talk again soon.